Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews with your host, Arlyeon. On today's episode, I'll be talking about the review copy I received of Luxoric's game's roguelike shmup, Space Robinson. Find out if I had a blast battling my way through its stages, or if it drained me of my will and left me feeling lost in space. The distant outpost of Colony 21 seems to be overdue for maintenance, and it's up to you to get the job done. Except, it's fairly hard to engage in repair work when your ship and supplies erupt into flames on entry. Spookier still, all the colonists are missing a little more than the occasional apocalyptic log left behind, and an ocean of hostile monsters in the way of you figuring out what needs to be done. And really, there's not a lot to be said for Space Robinson narratively. Sure, there's some randomized blurbs right at the station that provided a bit of flavor, but those mostly amounted to gags, and there is an NPC you can eventually meet, but the amount that they actually add to the story is minimal at best. Mechanically though, Space Robinson is a straightforward enough shmup experience. Players start out rather imposing at first and are tasked at clearing out the murderous denizens of the game's 3 biomes vis-a-vis Bullet and Wrench. Still, despite the fact that the game is perfectly happy to launch you in the midst of levels riddled with enemies, combat can feel somewhat slow. I personally felt this a number of times when I need to swap weapons in combat, as doing so locks down your ability to shoot for a time, almost akin to reloading. It also didn't help that you have a rather limited array of weapons you can actually carry with you, further narrowing down your means of approaching mobs. Honestly, the most dynamic part of your arsenal is your wrench, since you're almost never locked out of it, and yet it ends up feeling rather underwhelming when hitting most enemies until you have a few upgrades invested in it. Which, yeah, whilst you do have a slowly strengthening set of weapons to loot as you progress through the game, each level also houses a station, which grants you a means of acquiring a perk. Though it's limited to that run, they do provide some fairly significant changes, such as the ability to destroy bullets with your wrench, prolonged invincibility after a hit, or even larger pools of options from all future upgrade machines. I mean, what you get is going to be random, and in fact, one of the perks is outright useless until you've mostly beaten the game once, but it does provide some interesting directions for where your character can go. There's definitely some that feel a lot more powerful than others, however, such as the one that freezes creatures on melee hit, and which works on everything except the final boss. This can actually allow you to lock down the game's various mini-bosses who are absolutely capable of soaking an impressive amount of damage, and just very slowly cudgel them to death. And yet, I can't say I regretted doing that either, if only because the game's imbalanced difficulty curve. The second biome is hellish. Whether it's cloaking normal enemies or somewhat more trackable mini-boss, having an enemy pop up beside you and vomit bullets feels cheap and awful. And it's made worse by the sheer army of turret enemies just dropping missiles on you from above while this goes down. It's also pretty insulting actually, since if you do manage to get past the second biome, the third is nowhere near that sort of frustration. Hell, while the last boss can certainly provide a fight, I ultimately have died far less to him than the shenanigans of the game's balance. But then I suppose that's why there's the rogue-lite enhancement system. It doesn't help you at first, since you don't start with any upgrade or customization options, instead being tasked with figuring out how to acquire the game's various achievements, since they also tie to character upgrades. And well, even then, it doesn't even necessarily help you after that, as to activate any of these upgrades at the start of the run takes base power. And you also start with none, which is where the whole farm a rapidly escalating amount of loot to gain some degree of customization factors in. Especially since you don't actually acquire a heap ton of crystals, which is the currency for getting base power, until you reach the third area and unlock the ability to visit the greenhouse, which enables you to start runs with the ability to find more crystals, a random bonus perk, and a regenerating shield that soaks bullets, and honestly, that last upgrade is incredibly powerful. Like, not only do all of these just make things a bit easier if you're looking to make some headway into progressing and upgrading, but the bullet shield in itself actually makes it a legitimate possibility to advance before you're prepared. Because if you go toe-to-toe with the last boss and win before you've done what you want to do, the game gets permanently stuck on a higher difficulty setting past that point, making gaining the resource needed to upgrade or finishing certain achievements a complete pain. Which is both weird and sort of funny given there's actually difficulty options in the base to make things slightly more forgiving at the cost of dyeing your hair green, but you actually can't take back this particular shift in difficulty. Moving on though, soundtrack-wise, there isn't the most variety for the game, but despite that, it didn't quite manage to drive me up the wall, so there's definitely that. Also, in the visuals department, Space Robinson is honestly fairly cute in and of itself, though you're going to see a lot of recolors of the same enemies you've encountered earlier on. Still, I don't have any real gripes on this front. Which, I guess means it's finale time, so let's get to it. And well, initially, I didn't mind Space Robinson. Sure, combat wasn't great, but I did enjoy discovering the different weapons and perk combos. The perm upgrades are a bit of a slog, however, not only because of the vague, finicky descriptions for the achievements, but also due to the associated resources starting out awful. Honestly, it only starts to get good once you gain access to the greenhouse, but that requires you to navigate the flagrant heck hole that is the second biome to gain access to it. That said, I think the most egregious annoyance was the combination of the game's hubris and thinking I wanted to be pushed through it again and again after beating it, in tandem with the inability to shut off its remixed difficulty. Ultimately, between the combat system, the odds and ends of the difficulty, and just the repetition and the annoyance involved, Space Robinson ultimately ended up as a fumble to me. It starts out alright, but rather than inspiring me to continue grinding through its guts, it ultimately wore down on my nerves. Anyways, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And for those interested in more indie reviews, developer interviews, podcasts, or Monday TTRPG content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know when there's a new release. There's also a Discord. You can click the link in the banner in the description to become a part of our community, the Crit Hit Cauldron. Lastly, if you'd like to help support the channel, we do have a coffee running now to help supplement funds for our lovely editor Jack, and to make sure we can continue to provide quality content. Again, check the description in the banner for them links. And if you do have a suggestion for either an indie developer we should reach out to interview or a game you'd really like to see us review, do mention it in the comments. I do read them. Anywho, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.